I was 17 when the doctor said the word cancer. Everything after that felt like it was happening underwater. His lips were moving. My mom was crying. My dad was asking questions about insurance. But I couldn't hear anything except one sentence echoing in my head. You have leukemia. I thought the scariest part would be the treatments. I was wrong. The scariest part was watching my parents slowly disappear. At first, they showed up. They held my hand during the first appointment. My mom squeezed my fingers so tight it almost hurt. My dad kept saying, "We'll get through this." But by the third chemo session, the chair beside my hospital bed was empty. By the fifth, their phones went straight to voicemail. They said hospitals made them uncomfortable. They said it was too hard to see me like that. Too hard? I was the one losing my hair in clumps. I was the one throwing up until I couldn't breathe. I was the one terrified I wouldn't make it to 18. And then, one night, while I was fighting for my life, they made a decision that changed everything. They left. Not just the hospital. Me. Months later, when my father finally stood in front of me again, trying to explain why they couldn't handle my illness, I said 4 words. 4 words that made him completely speechless. And in that moment, I realized something. Cancer didn't break me. Their absence did. It didn't start with something dramatic. No sudden collapse. No ambulance lights. It started with being tired. Not normal tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I'd wake up exhausted. My legs felt heavy walking upstairs. Bruises started appearing on my arms, and I couldn't remember bumping into anything. When I told my mom, she barely looked up from her phone. "You're probably just stressed." My dad laughed and said, "Stop Googling symptoms. You'll convince yourself you're dying." I wanted them to be right. But then the fevers started. Low at first, then higher, then constant. One morning at school, my vision went blurry. The hallway tilted. And the next thing I remember, I was on the floor with teachers shouting my name. The hospital moved fast after that. Blood tests, scans, whispers in the hallway. I could tell something was wrong by the way the nurses stopped making eye contact. When the oncologist walked in, everything shifted. He didn't smile. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. That's when I knew. Your results show acute leukemia. The room went silent. My mom started crying instantly, loud and dramatic, like the diagnosis was happening to her. My dad didn't cry. He asked, "What are the treatment options? What's the survival rate? What does insurance usually cover?" Insurance. I remember staring at him, waiting for him to look at me. To say, "Are you scared?" To grab my hand. But he never did. The doctor explained chemo, side effects, risk levels. All I could think was, I'm 17. I haven't even graduated yet. I looked at my parents, hoping to see strength in their faces. Instead, I saw fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of inconvenience. And that was the moment I understood something I wasn't ready to accept. I wasn't just fighting cancer. I was about to fight it alone. Chemo doesn't look the way it does in movies. There's no soft background music. No brave smiles in perfect lighting. It smells like antiseptic and plastic tubes. The first day of treatment, my mom sat beside me, gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. My dad stood near the window, pacing, checking his phone every few minutes like he was waiting for an emergency call. The nurse hooked the 4 into my arm. Clear liquid began dripping into my veins. "This is the strongest round," she warned gently. Within hours, the nausea hit. Not normal nausea. The kind that makes your entire body shake. My mom couldn't watch. She stepped outside. My dad followed. They came back eventually, but something had shifted. By the second session, they talked less. By the third, they argued in the hallway. I could hear them through the thin hospital walls. "This is too much," my mom whispered harshly. "We can't keep living like this," my dad replied. Living like this? I was the one connected to machines. By the 4th treatment, they started arriving late. By the 5th, my mom sent a text. "Not feeling well today. Dad will come." Dad didn't. He said work meetings were important. I stopped asking. Hair started falling out in clumps 2 weeks in. I stood in the shower watching strands circle the drain like something was leaving me piece by piece. When I showed my mom, she tried to smile. "It'll grow back," she said quickly, before changing the subject. She couldn't handle the visual reminder. Neither could my dad. The hospital staff noticed before I did. "Where are your parents today?" one nurse asked gently. "They're parking," I lied. They weren't parking. They were distancing. Visits got shorter. Calls got briefer. Eventually, my dad started sending money instead of showing up, as if presents could be replaced with payment. One night after a brutal chemo session, I woke up disoriented and vomiting. I reached for my phone to call my mom. It went straight to voicemail. I texted my dad. No response. The nurse sat with me instead, holding my shoulders while I shook. That was the night something inside me cracked. Not my body. My belief. I realized I had been clinging to the idea that they would snap out of it, that this was temporary, that once they adjusted, they'd become the parents I needed. But they weren't adjusting. They were retreating. Cancer was changing me physically, but it was changing them emotionally, and not in a good way. The more fragile I became, the more distant they grew. And somewhere between hospital bracelets and empty chairs, I understood something terrifying. My illness wasn't just testing my strength. It was exposing theirs. And they were failing. I think the exact moment I knew they were really leaving wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming. No slammed doors. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels permanent. It was late. I was home between treatments, weak and dizzy, wrapped in a blanket on the couch. I woke up to voices in the kitchen. They didn't know I was awake. "This is ruining everything," my dad said, his voice low but sharp. "I can't keep living at hospitals," my mom replied. "I feel like I'm drowning." Drowning. I was the one whose lungs burned from treatment. I was the one whose bones felt like they were splitting open from the inside. But somehow, my illness was happening to them. Dad sighed heavily. "We didn't plan for this. We had plans. Plans. College tours. Vacations. Promotions. I guess cancer wasn't on the family vision board." 2 weeks later, they sat me down at the kitchen table. I remember the sunlight hitting the table. The way dust floated in the air like nothing in the world was wrong. "We think it would be better," my mom began carefully, "if we stayed with friends for a while." "For space," my dad added. Space? I was 17, bald, attached to a chemo schedule. "What about my treatments?" I asked quietly. "We'll figure something out," Dad said. They had already figured it out. They just hadn't told me. My aunt picked me up 3 days later with 2 suitcases and a forced smile that couldn't hide her anger. They didn't even come outside to say goodbye. I watched from the passenger seat as my house got smaller in the rearview mirror. That was the last time it felt like home. My aunt didn't hesitate. She cleared out her guest room. She drove me to every chemo appointment. She sat beside me, even when I told her she didn't have to. When I got sick at 2 a.m., she held my hair, what little was left of it. She never complained. Not once. Meanwhile, my parents called less and less. At first, it was every few days. Then once a week. Then just texts. "How are you feeling?" As if I could summarize chemotherapy in one word. One night, I stared at my phone after sending them an update from the hospital. No reply. I realized something in that moment that hurt more than the 4 in my arm. They weren't temporarily overwhelmed. They had chosen themselves. Cancer didn't scare them away. Responsibility did. And as I lay in that hospital bed, listening to machines beep in the dark, I finally stopped hoping they'd walk through the door. Because the truth was devastatingly clear. They hadn't just left the hospital. They had abandoned their daughter. Cancer has a strange way of stripping everything down to the truth. When you're sitting in a hospital chair for hours, watching chemicals drip into your veins, you have a lot of time to think. At first, I kept making excuses for them. They're scared. They don't know how to handle it. They'll come around. But weeks turned into months. And silence turned into clarity. The treatments were brutal, but something unexpected happened. I got stronger. Not physically. Emotionally. I stopped checking my phone during chemo, hoping for a message. I stopped staring at the door when footsteps passed my room. I stopped imagining surprise visits. Instead, I started focusing on survival. The nurses became my cheerleaders. My aunt became my anchor. And somewhere between blood transfusions and sleepless nights, I stopped being the scared girl who needed her parents. I became someone who could endure. Then came the day the doctor walked in with a different tone in his voice. He smiled. "Your numbers are improving." Improving. It felt like sunlight breaking through months of gray. Round after round, my body responded. Slowly, carefully, life began pushing back against the illness. The day I rang the remission bell, the hallway filled with applause. Nurses hugged me. My aunt cried openly. I smiled for the first time in months without forcing it. But there were 2 people missing. Again. That night, my dad sent a text. Proud of you. That was it. No, I'm sorry. No, we should have been there. No, we failed you. Just 2 words. And instead of crying, I felt something else. Calm. Because in that moment, I understood something powerful. I didn't survive because of them. I survived despite them. And that realization changed everything. The breaking point wasn't when they left. It was when I stopped needing them to come back. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was sitting at my aunt's kitchen table, homework spread out in front of me, hair barely long enough to tuck behind my ears again. Life wasn't normal. But it was stable. Then there was a knock at the door. My aunt looked through the window first. Her jaw tightened. It's your dad. My stomach didn't drop. It didn't twist. It just stayed steady. That surprised me. He stepped inside slowly, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to breathe the same air. He looked older, tired, smaller somehow. For a second, I searched his face for something regret, maybe. He cleared his throat. Hey, kiddo. Kiddo. He hadn't called me that since before the diagnosis. We sat across from each other. There was no dramatic music, no shouting, just space. He started talking quickly, like if he spoke fast enough, the words wouldn't hurt as much. We didn't handle things right. You have to understand, it was overwhelming. We were scared. Scared. I had faced needles, transfusions, the possibility of dying before 18. But they were scared. He rubbed his hands together. Your mom took it really hard. Seeing you like that, it broke her. I almost laughed. It broke her? It almost killed me. We thought giving you space would make it easier, he continued. Space. That word again. I let him finish. Every excuse. Every explanation wrapped in soft language. Not once did he say the word abandon. Finally, he looked up at me. We want to fix this, he said quietly. We want to come back. Start over. Start over. Like cancer was a bad semester we could erase. Like chemo was a misunderstanding. Like I hadn't memorized the ceiling tiles in that hospital room because I had no one to talk to. He leaned forward slightly. Can we start fresh? And that's when I realized something. He wasn't here because he understood. He was here because the crisis was over. Because I survived. Because I was no longer inconvenient. The power in the room had shifted. Not to anger. To clarity. I wasn't the weak one anymore. I wasn't the scared girl in the hospital bed. I was the one who endured. He waited for my answer. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small sitting across from my father. I felt certain. I looked him straight in the eyes. And I spoke. He was still waiting. Waiting for forgiveness. Waiting for relief. Waiting for me to make it easy for him. For years, I had been the one trying to earn their approval. Trying not to be dramatic. Trying not to be too much. Trying not to be a burden. But cancer burned that version of me away. I didn't need approval anymore. I needed honesty. He leaned forward slightly. We can move past this, he said. We're still your parents. That sentence used to mean safety. Now it just sounded like biology. I studied his face. The lines around his eyes. The guilt he was trying to hide behind calm words. And I realized something powerful. He wasn't here because he understood my pain. He was here because he wanted relief from his own. He wanted to believe they hadn't failed completely. He wanted to rewrite the story now that the scary part was over. But I lived through the scary part. Alone. I thought about the nights in the hospital when machines beeped in the dark. The mornings I woke up nauseous and shaking. The day I rang the remission bell and scanned the hallway one last time, just in case. They weren't there. My aunt was. The nurses were. I was. So I took a slow breath. Not angry. Not shaking. Just steady. And I said 4 words. I needed you then. That's it. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just truth. The words hung in the air between us. His mouth opened slightly, like he was about to defend himself again. But there was no defense for absence. No excuse that could compete with an empty hospital chair. His eyes dropped to the table. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. Because some things can't be fixed with apologies. Some moments don't get a redo. I wasn't saying I hated him. I wasn't saying I'd never speak to them again. I was saying something stronger. You don't get credit for showing up after the storm when you abandoned me in the hurricane." Silence filled the room. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Cancer took my hair. It took my strength. It took my childhood innocence. But it gave me clarity. And sometimes, the strongest revenge isn't anger. It's survival. Without them. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the sick girl they left behind. I felt unstoppable.